me out. And it flies off eventually. He watches it for a long time, flies off. He goes back to his house, goes in the house with his wife, and says, oh my God, I had this mystical experience. This owl on a branch, and it was looking at me, it was screeching, it was chewing me out, and it was a scary noise. And his wife says, that's nice, honey. Can you set the table for dinner? He's like, okay. He sits at dinner, he's eating dinner, his kids are there, and he's like, you won't believe what happened. I was out in the forest, this owl was screeching, it was looking right at me, he was like yelling at me, chewing me out, this scary noise. And they were like, Dad. So after dinner, he gets his camera and he goes back in the woods. He stands there, he goes to the same spot, he stands there and he speaks loud into the woods and says, my family doesn't believe me, I need a picture. So this owl flies up and lands on a branch. He takes a picture, that's the picture, and he flies up, and the owl flies up. So my question was, after hearing this whole story, I was like, what were you meditating on? And I'm going to read it directly here. He said, I was meditating on the source of creation. I was praying to see through the veil, praying for answers. I was struggling with what God is. So that's an owl story without the UFO, but it has everything to do with the weird power of these stories. And I would argue that this story, this man's experience, has been happening throughout human history in one form or another. And stories like this are the source of our collective owl mythology. Wow, this is flying by. So, what I'm about to share next is a long, complicated series of stories. I call it my confirmation event. And until this event, I had never really been able to say, I am a UFO abductee. It did not feel honest. I had a lot of clues, but it did not feel honest. But all that changed on the night of March 10th, 2013. I was driving home from a UFO conference, and I started in the morning. I was in Arizona, and I was driving back to Idaho, and I knew I was going to be sleeping at a certain spot. That green push pin here is where I slept. It's in southern Utah, in a beautiful spot, a beautiful empty spot of southern Utah. And it was dark when I pulled in, and I pulled into this little turnout, and I found a perfect spot to sleep. And I sleep out a lot on roaches. It's easy to do out west in the desert and in the big open spaces, and I do this a lot. I do it for two reasons. One, I don't need to get a hotel room. And two, I love it. I love sleeping under the stars. It's beautiful. It's really vital for who I am to sleep out. So, it's late, I pull into this turnout, I take my big, thick sleeping bag, and I take my big, thick sleeping pad, I have a pillow, and I lay it right next to the car, and I go to sleep, and I wake up later that night, and I see this. This is a Photoshop. I recreated this Photoshop. So I'm laying there on my pillow, I'm looking up at this hillside, and there's this big round structure with lights around the circumference of it. And I say to myself, that looks just like a landed flying saucer. And I was just come from a UFO conference. I'd been doing all this research into the mystical and the spiritual side of this stuff. And I was thinking to myself, I'm pretty hot stuff. Like if this is a UFO, I'm going to know it. I'm going to feel it. I'm going to feel it intuitively. So I looked at this thing for a long time. I felt nothing at all. I was like, someone built a big house above my door. I rolled over and went to sleep. I woke up a second time. And there was a coyote right near my head. I didn't see it. It was loud. I sat up and tried to look around. The starlight should be easy to see. I saw nothing. I heard the call of a coyote close. I've slept 1,000 nights in areas just like this. And I have never had a coyote that close or that loud. It was so close, I didn't understand why I couldn't see it. And I'll also say that I felt blessed. I felt really blessed. I felt it was a really powerful, beautiful thing to hear something that wild. So I woke up a third time, and there was a light behind the bush at my feet. And it didn't look like a car light. My thought was, well, maybe someone's doing the same thing I'm doing. They're just on a long drive, they're pulling up to they're just going to spend the night. And I sat up and I tried to look, and it was just some glow, but something odd was about that. So I rolled over, went to sleep, and then I still looked up at and I could see the round structure on the hill. I remember rolling and seeing that round structure on the hill, and I went back to sleep. And I woke up sometime later that morning and drove home. And I drove between southern Utah and my home in Idaho, and that night, the coyote and the round structure, the glow of the tree, it bothered me. And I arrived home late that afternoon. The first thing I did was get to my desk and draw a big map, or excuse me, create a map online. I used Google Earth to create the map. This image is from the map I created. That green spot down below, the green push pin, is where the round structure on the hill. The yellow push pin, that is it? That's the stuff. Testing. Can you all hear me? No. Okay, how's my voice?
No.
Right now, can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Did I do something? No, I turned that off, so I got my own counter. Hold, let me just put this on. Okay. Sorry about that. We're in the good part of the store here.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay. So if I go a couple minutes over, I got an excuse now, right? So I got home, I tried to find a big structure on the hill. There's nothing there. There's no big round structure. That thing was big. It was 1.6 miles away between the two things. What that told me was huge. The thing was big. And I couldn't find it. There would have been a road going up there. I would have been able to easily see a building. There was nothing there. I went back a year later. This is exactly where I was sleeping. That big round structure would have been right there. It would have been easy to see. And there was nothing there. So let's jump back to the day after I got home from sleeping out under the stars. I did what I do. I did a blog post. There's the image I created for the blog post. That was the image that just filled the screen just a minute ago. And after I put it online, and I remember standing by my desk, and there came this moment where I had this like poof, this like click vision in my mind. It was just like sudden bang. I got this image in my mind, and I had a map of southern Utah in my mind, and it had a straight yellow line and 3 push pins. And this was vividly clear. I saw it for half a second. I'm standing right next to my desk. I'd just been making maps the day before. I sat right down at the desk and started making a detailed map. I knew what this one over here, this was the night of March 10th, 2013, which was the day before, and I knew what this was. This happened in May of 2010, and it happened in Dolores, Colorado. And at the time, I was camping and traveling around the West with my friend Natasha, and I met her at a UFO conference, and I will cautiously say she has all the things in her life that would imply direct UFO contact. So, we're having a great time, we're driving around the West, we're camping out, we're hiking, we're sleeping under the stars, and we hung out in Moab, we went to Canyonlands, we went to Mesa Verde, and then we get to Cortez, Colorado, and the brakes were acting funny on my car. My Subaru was like, I think it smelled it, and it was acting a little, so I was on the main street of this town, the town of Cortez, and I asked someone, like, hey, you know a good mechanic in town? It's a little town in the West. And someone says, sure, you go to the corner, you go 2 blocks back, everyone uses this guy in town. So I went there, and I showed up, and they said, okay, brakes are acting funny, I'll put it up on the lift. And so Natasha and I hung out, and she was really funny. She's from Germany, and she just loved this little town. She's like, oh, this is so cute, this little town. And so a little while later, the guy comes back out of where he was looking at my car. He's kind of got the oily rag in his hand. He's wiping his hands off. And he looks at me and he says, I can't let you leave town or you'll die. Okay, so what does that mean? He says, I can't let you leave town because the brakes in your car are just about to fail. And if I let you leave the shop, I would be liable. And if the brakes failed at high speed, it could be bad. Okay, what does this mean? He says, I can fix this. It's going to take me 5 days to get the parts. So Natasha and I are like, okay. So it was actually, the guy who ran the shop, hooked us up with a really cheap rent-a-car, like really cheap. And we had this nice car, we drove around for 5 more days. It was really fun. But that first night we needed a place to sleep. So we went to the coffee shop and we asked around and said, is there a place to sleep here? And the girl behind the counter said, oh yeah, this is where people sleep. You go to Dolores, Colorado, go to Dolores the next town, past Cortez. And you go about 2 miles into the backcountry on this Forest Service road, and there's great camping out there. So great, so Natasha and I set up a tent. Natasha and I set up a tent, and this blue push pin from that map, the big map with the straight yellow line, was where we spent the night. So, at one point in the middle of the night, Natasha and I both woke up screaming. This was some crazy primal fear. She describes it exactly as I described it. It was like, so I worked in the outdoors. I've spent thousands of nights in the tent. I have never been this scared. If a grizzly bear had ripped through the tent with its jaws around my throat, I would not have been as scared as I was in this moment in the tent. And I was like, Natasha, what happened? What happened? What happened? All she would say was, I saw a face. So we're, heart pumping, adrenaline, freak out, and then we're both asleep. And I have this memory, which I don't trust, but this is my memory. The next thing I knew, I was floating up off the sleeping pad. And in the corner of the tent was this round thing. I called it a pizza pan, or a mandala. So the size of a pizza pan, was kind of translucent and glowing, lighting up the inside of the tent. And I was floating up. And as I floated up, I said, I have to remember this. I have to remember this. I have to remember this. And then I said, and then I seemed to pass through the top of the tent. And all of a sudden, I was in this white, ethereal realm. And I said, am I on a table? Am I on a table? Am I on a table? And then I heard Natasha's voice go, with her thick German accent, she said, Mike, you're floating, and I was back in the tent. I don't think that's what happened. I don't think she ever spoke, but that's my direct memory. So the next morning I get up and what happened? Like this, we slept all night, and the sun comes up, and I'm like, what happened last night? What happened? And she said, I saw a face. And like, you got to tell me, what did you see? You saw a face? What are you talking about? Where was the face? And she pointed to the exact spot where that big circle was. I called it a pizza pan. I called it a mandala. So the mandala, that's what I called it, is an ancient symbol. Carl Jung, the psychiatrist Carl Jung, wrote about the mandala. He said it is a symbol of the self. He wrote about his patients going through a process where they were spontaneously drawing, painting, or sculpting mandalas during a point of crisis or change in their lives. And he wrote, the appearance of the mandala indicates a profound rebalancing process is underway in the psyche. He wrote that in the 1920s. The ancient Greeks, the Pythagoreans, an occult group of mathematicians, called this symbol the monad. They considered it the conception of the one, of the source of everything, the absolute. It is also known as the Godhead. So the question is, why did I see an ancient symbol for God at that moment? At that tent. So, the next morning, I get out of the tent, birds are chirping, the sun is shining, it's a beautiful day, and I walked around the tent, and I was looking for a big burn mark in the grass where a flying saucer had landed. There was nothing. But later that morning, I took my shirt off, and I had a weird scratch that started at my left shoulder and went down across my belly button. And when you looked at it, it would just look like a normal scratch, like a single cat claw or a single rose thorn that had gone across my chest. But when you looked at it closely, it was a row of tiny, fluid-filled blisters. One after another, dot, 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 dot. Tiny, itty-bitty, fluid-filled blisters. From my shoulder to my belly button. So, we're stuck with a rent-a-car. We go to the coffee shop, same coffee shop we were at the night before. I get on my flip phone, and I call my friend Miriam Delicato, who's done a lot of research and written books, and has had her own direct contact experiences. And I called her up and I said, Miriam, we're stuck down in Four Corners area, what do we do? And she says, you go to Canyon de Chelly. I said, oops. Okay, good. You go to Canyon de Chelly. It's in the Navajo tribal lands, and it's a beautiful place, and there's a guy that I know there. You get a hold of him, and he can run a sweat lodge ceremony for you. I'm like, great, awesome, that's beautiful. So we spent the day in the bottom of this canyon. This is one of the most mystical, beautiful places on earth. It's gorgeous. We had this Navajo guide take us through the canyon. It was magical. The next morning, we did a sweat lodge ceremony that lasted almost the entire day. There's Natasha, there's the host, the Navajo man that led the ceremony. That's me. You can't really tell, but I'm holding a cat in that picture. And this is an image from my sketchbook. This is the sweat lodge. It wasn't hardly anything at all. It was this I-beams, structural beams, just bent over, like rebar, excuse me. And then they were just covered with blankets. And there was a place where you'd get the rocks really hot with a fire. And it was a really powerful, beautiful experience. It was hot, progressively hotter, 4 different stages, the 4 cardinal directions of the compass. And the theme was surrender. So that's a long story. That story starts with the guy saying, you can't leave town or you'll die. And it ends with a metaphoric ceremony of death and rebirth by a shaman. So, here I told you the 2 stories at each end of this line. And I was like, what? I know, I've traveled tons in this area. I've spent a lot of time in this area. And what was that 3rd point? I said, oh, that's right. I camped along the Birch Trail Road, which is just east of the tiny, tiny town of Boulder, Utah. And I camped along that road with Natasha in March of 2011. She had come back again the next year to camp and travel with me around the desert Southwest. We went to a UFO conference in Arizona, and then spent some time traveling around the West and just doing the same thing, camping out. So she was from Germany. She had just arrived from Germany. I had been driving all day. She's jet lagged. I'm tired. So the sun goes down, and this is where we camped. So here's the asphalt road, the Birch Trail Road, and here's this little sand road that takes us to where I was camped. And that red push bin is where we were camped. Just sleeping out under the stars. Gorgeous, perfect, beautiful day. It was cold. And Natasha finally says, like, I can't sleep. Mike, I gotta do something. I'm totally jet lagged, I can't sleep. And I was like, I couldn't stay awake. So I was like, take a walk. Just go walk around, it's beautiful. I'm like, this is a safe part of the world. So I wasn't worried at all. And she's like, well, okay. So she walks off. Now while she's gone, I'm lying there alone, drifting in and out of sleep. And there's a great horned owl somewhere near my head. So if I'm sleeping here, I'm pretty sure the owl was in that bush. I sat up, I looked at it, I looked in the bush, it was a scrubby little juniper bush, I saw nothing. So Natasha's out walking. So I saw nothing. So I'm going to say that, like, it felt so much like when I was preparing this talk and stuff, like, it was so close I don't understand why I didn't see it. And that feels exactly the same as the coyote in the first story I told. So, beautiful clear night, Natasha's walking along. I've talked to her, I wrote this up, I talked a lot. So she said, it was so beautiful and so magical. When she was walking along the road, she said, it felt like I was sparkling. It was really magical for her. Tons of ambient light just from the stars alone. And then she looks off into the sagebrush and she sees this glowing dot. And she's like, what is that? Is there someone out there with a flashlight? Someone must be out there with a flashlight. And she kind of looks and says, no, it's like moving too low against the sagebrush and it's floating in this eerie, smooth way. And she's watching this thing and it grows. It's a little size of a grapefruit, then it blows up to the size of a beach ball, and then it shrinks back down, and then poof, it flashes and disappears. She's suddenly gone and she's scared. She runs back to me and she says, Mike, we gotta leave. And said, oh, what's up? She explains, oh, I walked the road, the orb, it flashed, let's get out of here. She said, okay, let's get out of here. So we packed up the car really quick, and we left. So that little red dot is where we slept. It's where I heard an owl. So I'm alone at my desk, I'm making this map. I got these two outer lines, and they're on layers, right? You can just click them off and turn them on. So I clicked my clicker, and what happened next changed my life. It changed everything, everything. I clicked on the layer of the map, and that yellow line bisected exactly where I was sleeping. 1 pixel thick line. Zoom in on it. It